Okay, right. So this is Insomnia Month, and I'm chatting with Susannah Alexander. Susannah, do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I am normally based in London, but currently living in the Highlands of Scotland. And I am a size-friendly nutritional therapist, and I specialise in blood pressure and in mood. And sleep is very closely linked to both of those things. So it's very important to me to discuss this with you today.
Awesome. Right. So we know that in perimenopause, a lot of women's sleep gets disturbed, and it really doesn't help us, does it? So what's going on? Where do we start?
Right. Well, first of all, Emily, you're absolutely right in saying that this is a very common problem. So if you're suffering from insomnia in the menopause, of the perimenopause, you're definitely not alone. They think that up to 40% of women may suffer from some form of insomnia, some sort of sleep disruption when they're in the menopause. So, no wonder that we all get a bit ratty when
Yeah.
that happens. And it may be that your insomnia is accompanied by night sweats, and it may be that it's not. And there are many, many factors that influence insomnia, but just to talk about one, which we're all very familiar with, is that, of course, our levels of estrogen are falling during our perimenopause. And estrogen levels have an effect on serotonin. So serotonin production is inhibited when our estrogen level falls. Now, serotonin is very calming, and it affects our sleep and it affects our ability to relax. So inevitably, if your estrogen is affecting your serotonin production, then one of the things that can happen is that your sleep gets disrupted. So that's just one of the many things that could be happening.
Makes sense. And as with so many of the symptoms, unbalanced hormones are just a starting point, aren't they, for all of it?
Absolutely, and it doesn't end with serotonin. And what I think it's very important to say is that, there are so many remedies out there for insomnia, and all of them have merit.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important for women who are suffering with these symptoms to do a little bit more digging and to look more holistically at what's happening in their situation, and to look at some of the underlying issues that could be underpinning their insomnia, because estrogen is one. The other thing is there's a genetic component in insomnia. In fact, genetics may account for up to 57% of insomnia, and that's because your genetic variants have an effect on your hormone production and also on your ability to use hormones and to get rid of hormones when you've used them up. So all these things can have a knock-on effect, and that's why genetics are so important. So that may be one area to look at, but also we could look at thyroid function, we could look at histamine function, we could look at inflammation, and we could look at nutrient status, and we could look at blood sugar. All these things, and of course stress, could be having, either singly or in combination, an effect on your sleep.
Yeah, and stress is a huge one, isn't it? I mean, at this age, a lot of us have maybe elderly parents, maybe under current circumstances with the pandemic, homeschooling or whatever, and potentially we've got to a point in our jobs where it's quite stressful. It's a bit of a perfect storm, really, isn't it?
It is, because again, stress will very much affect hormone function, serotonin, dopamine, BDNF, which is a factor that affects mood. So again, if you're depressed, you may have trouble sleeping. Your mood may affect your ability to sleep. So absolutely, all these stresses, and they could be environmental stresses as well. It could be that that we're in an environment where, for example, if you're surrounded by a lot of plastics and that kind of thing, it's putting additional burden on your detoxification pathways. So, for example, your ability to remove excess estrogen may be affected. So all of these things, looking not only at your, we always look at sleep hygiene as a first step, but looking also at your wider environment and what could be influencing you there could be really important for some people.
Absolutely. And I guess at the moment, given that we're in a pandemic and a lot of people's work-life balance is very different to how it would normally be. You know, those classic things that people turn to manage their stress so that they sleep better, maybe going to the gym, maybe catching up with friends, maybe whatever, maybe going on holiday, whatever, all of those things are suddenly, nope, none shall pass. And that makes it hard again, doesn't it?
Yeah, all of these strategies that aren't available to us suddenly. So this is, you know, on the downside, of course, we can't go on holiday, we can't spend an evening with our friends, we can't go to the gym, but maybe we can look for new and creative ways to look after stress in our lives. And, you know, sometimes it's not possible to work with everything. You know, I think some people have really unrealistic expectations about removing the stress in your life. But if you're living with the stress, you know, if you're constantly next to a man who snores every single night, then, you know, and you haven't got another room you can go and sleep in, you know, there's not much way of removing that. So sometimes you have to work around it. And that's when maybe things like, you know, nutrition come into play, because it just gives you that bit of extra support where the psychosocial stuff can't be changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we see in the hub, I mean, daily, really, people asking what magnesium will help them to sleep, what, you know, this. And obviously, as with everything, some supplements will help some people and some won't help others. So is there any kind of one size fits all thing that you could suggest, or is it absolutely personal?
I think it is personal, but I think that what I would say to people is check various areas in your life and see if any of these speak to you. So, obviously we've talked about stress, that's a biggie, and we've said that, you know, there are some things that you're going to be able to do about your stress, and there are some things that you're not going to be able to do about your stress. And remember, you know, I know there are a lot of people who are very upset because they can't go to the gym, but I'm sure you know better than me, Emily, that there's much exercise that we can do outside of the gym.
Yeah.
And, you know, the good news is it really doesn't matter what kind of exercise you do, as long as it's an exercise that makes you feel good, it can very well help you, both with sleep and with mood.
Yeah. Yeah. Exercise is huge. And as you say, you know, exercise doesn't have to be all treadmills and weight racks. It can be walking, it can be yoga, it can be dancing in your kitchen. It simply doesn't matter, does it?
Absolutely. And, you know, sometimes over exercise can actually be a problem for you. So, you know, sometimes in fact, maybe not going to the gym is a time to sort of assess your exercise regime and just see what works for you. You know, I tell this story many times. I'm practically allergic to gyms because of a bad experience that happened to me. You know, I will literally have my depression triggered when I go in the gym, but I've discovered dancing, and, you know, I'm a plus size dancer now.
Yeah.
And that has done a lot for my mood, and I think it's done quite a lot for my sleep as well, to be honest.
Yeah. And I well, having first met you early in that whole situation, it's, yeah, you're a much happier person for having found the thing that suits you.
I mean, just a word of, which I'm sure you'll reiterate, a word of caution about exercise. Timing of exercise. Try not to do it last thing.
Absolutely. The timing of exercise is so important and personal. Again, you know, if you tend to be a morning person and you tend to be more of an wake early and sleep early sort of person, trying to push and exercise in the evening is not going to help you.
And probably exercise before bed. You know, if you're somebody for whom exercise releases endorphins, which it doesn't for everybody, everyone says it does, but sometimes it doesn't. But if you're one of those people for whom it does, you don't want to be releasing a load of endorphins, a load of uppers right before you go to bed. That's not going to help with your sleep.
No. And that's where, if that's the time in the day that you have that is available for you to exercise, that's when you want a gentle yoga class or a nice walk, not a full-on spin class or a HIIT class or something, you know.
Exactly. So we've talked a little bit about stress, we've talked a little bit about exercise, but, you know, maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you're quite happy in lockdown, like my mother-in-law, who absolutely loves it. Next thing to look at would be your blood sugar balance. So if you are someone who gets a lot of highs and lows, if you're someone who needs coffee to wake up in the morning, if you're someone who has a big 4 o'clock slump and can't sleep at night, then yes, that could be partly stress and inflammation, but that could also be partly your blood sugar balance.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's you, if that sounds like your pattern, a couple of things you can do before you come anywhere near someone like me. Make sure you're eating regularly throughout the day. So, you know, whatever your pattern is, whether it's 5 little meals or 3 bigger ones, doesn't matter. But make sure that you're doing it at regular intervals so that you're not like having, you know, a tiny, tiny little thing in the morning and then not eating all day and then having a massive dinner.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
No. As soon as you reach the point of thinking you might be veering into hangry, it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. So try and regularize your meals throughout the day and try and include protein with your meals.
And that can be so simple, can't it? I mean,
yeah,
it can be as simple as just having some hummus in the fridge and some oatcakes, and just as a snack, you know, if you know that the gap between 2 meals is going to be just long enough that you're going to waver, then just grab a couple of oatcakes with hummus and job's a good one, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, don't make eating a source of stress ever.
No.
Never,
and it's one of those things, I think, there can be a general perception at large that if you're going to sort of keep on top of blood sugar and hunger levels, that somehow you're having to dive into a huge meal far too often for you to be comfortable. And actually it isn't. It's just it's making sure that you have the snacks that you know help you in your house, isn't it? Whether that's a handful of nuts, whether that's, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. If you find what works for you and have them in the house, then you don't find yourself diving into the biscuit tin or whatever, you know.
Exactly.
Or, you know, diving into the
be
biscuit tin, it just doesn't really help your blood sugar.
Yeah, you know, and another thing would be to sort of batch boil some hard-boiled eggs. So, you know, if you're a homeschooling person and, you know, you're running around, you're trying to make 3 kids work and eat, and, you know, you're trying to run your business as well, and all this stuff's going on, you know, in the morning when you do whatever you do for breakfast, batch boil some hard-boiled eggs and just, you know, sit down for 5 minutes, grab a hard-boiled egg, grab whatever you want to go with it, and eat that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is certainly at the moment, I'm noticing this generally sort of across Facebook and stuff. I spend far too much time on Facebook, and that would be a sleep hygiene thing that I need to address. And I'm seeing that a lot of people who, under normal circumstances, whatever they may be, would the night before would always put together the packed lunches for everybody, and you know they'd have that routine of being prepared. And now that people are working from home, that routine of being prepared for meals has potentially fallen by the wayside, because people think, well, I'm at home, so I can just get some food. But actually, if you try to get back into that habit of pre-preparing, then you know you're better positioned, aren't you, to just grab something when the energy levels dip, rather than thinking, it's all too late and I've missed the boat.
You're better positioned, and it takes the stress out of it. You don't have that stress thinking, I'm really hungry, what am I going to eat?
Yeah, opening the fridge door going,
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's great if you can spend some time meal planning, and actually, you know, if you have got kids at home, get them involved.
Yeah.
You know, get them doing some planning. A, because it's a good skill for them, and B, because, you know, you want to encourage them to develop good eating habits without being preachy about it, and getting them involved and saying, you know, what would you guys like to eat this week? What should we make? You know, would you like to make some hummus for me? Is as good a way as any of getting them involved.
Absolutely. And I'm actually going to take this opportunity to just quickly say that you do online cookery classes for kids, don't you? And I know you weren't trying
and adults, in fact.
Take the opportunity to plug it for you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have a club called Kids in the Kitchen, which is it's aimed at sort of 7 to 14-year-olds, but there's a bit of flexibility either end. And 2 options: you can buy a monthly subscription, which gets you 2 live classes and 2 recorded classes, or you can pay as you go, and then you just get access to whichever live classes you want to. And all my food is free of refined sugar if you want it to be. If you've only got sugar in the house, just use it. I'm not going to be a food Nazi. And it can be adapted for gluten-free, sugar-free, dairy-free, and there are always vegetarian options. So, and if your kid doesn't like something, I can suggest a substitute. So pretty much any kind of dietary needs or fussiness, I just want kids to feel welcome and just to enjoy healthy cooking without being preached at.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry, that was just a little aside. I just wanted to give you the
little aside.
No, back to insomnia.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think looking at blood sugar is quite important, because if you're wired at night, then you can't sleep, and I know that feeling, and it sucks.
Yeah.
So that's one area to look at. So if you're getting energy dips and peaks, that's what you probably need to be looking at first.
Mm-hmm.
Associated with energy very strongly is thyroid. So thyroid can very much affect sleep, and it's important, if you get tested, to get as full a test as you possibly can, because what doctors will generally do is they'll test your TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone. And your thyroid stimulating, what that basically is it's this hormone that comes along and goes, make thyroxine. And you don't know if you're actually making any.
Yeah.
And and there's another thing as well. So it goes, make thyroxine, and so if it's working, the hormone that's produced is called T4. Now T4 doesn't do anything in its T4 form, because if it did, it would eat up your thyroid. Don't want that. So it has to be converted into an active form. So this is another step in the process. So you could have you could have the right levels of TSH. You could be making enough T4. It could be hanging around being inactive and not converting to T3.
Yeah. Yes. So just looking at the TSH only gives you a tiny part of the picture, doesn't it?
So some GPs, if you sort of push them a bit, they'll do a full panel, and some won't. Some will look at antibodies as well. That's an important thing to look at, because it may be that your thyroid dysfunction isn't to do with a nutrient deficiency, it's to do with it's an autoimmune problem.
Yeah.
So it's important to look at that as well. So that's the first thing. If you're going to, first of all, get a full panel. Secondly, know your numbers.
Yeah. And this is something where you can help people, can't you? You can point people in the right direction. You can help them to interpret the numbers and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yep. That's one of the things that we work with quite a lot. And some people need medication to regulate their thyroid function, and that's absolutely fine. If people are using medication, we can still help them with nutrition, because we can make them we can enable them to make the most of that medication. We can enable them to time the medication with their meals, or to divide the doses in the way that benefits them the most, because sometimes you can take too much at once and then your sleep gets affected. So if you're using medication, I'm never against medication. Always follow your doctor's advice. But if you are using medication, or if you're not, we can still help you with nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely. And that message is true, whether it's thyroid meds, whether it's antidepressants, whether it's HRT. They aren't right, well, I'm taking that, I'm done. It's actually also look at what else is going on, isn't it?
Exactly, because you can do both at the same time. I mean, as long as you do it safely. Again, there are sometimes I see on the hub, and this is a little bit of a niggle that I have, is that people say, oh yeah, take whatever supplements you want with your medication. There's absolutely no problem because they're natural. Okay, please don't.
Yes, please don't. There's so many supplements.
So many supplements do have interactions.
Yes.
You might come to no harm, but you might. And I say this in every single webinar that I do with Emily. I'm going to say it again. If you have any doubts as to what you should be taking with your medication, please message me, because I will, for free, check on the nutrient interaction database, because I want you guys to be safe out there. Okay.
Yeah. And that is a really important message. Please don't just think because you can buy it over the counter in the supermarket or whatever that it won't have an interaction, because it might do. And much better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly. And some things, as we've said, some things are good for some people and some things are not good for others. And that can even be a genetic thing. There are, and I wouldn't say this for everybody, because they're not cheap, but there are genetic factors that we can look at. And some of them can be very useful with regard to insomnia and with regard to mood.
Okay, yeah. And this is the thing, there is so much, and I suppose this brings us back to where we started, that it's so much more complicated as a subject, insomnia, than just saying have some sleep hygiene and you'll be fine.
Exactly. And that might very well sort it out for some. I would say to everyone, practice good sleep hygiene, whether or not any of these factors we've discussed are factors for you. Still practice good sleep hygiene, because it's not going to do you any harm.
No,
but it
absolutely.
may not be sufficient by itself.
Absolutely. And I think, we these days, we're all attached to this all the time and so on and so forth. And just taking a break, just going right back to the basics of sleep hygiene, just taking a break from your phone and from screens an hour before you go to sleep can have such a big impact.
Exactly. And of course, while we're on the subject of stopping things before we're going to bed, always try and stop eating 3 hours before you go to bed. Especially if one of the factors in your insomnia is something like reflux, or waking up with, if you wake up in the night with discomfort, by the way, with pain, you should speak to someone medical. But if you're waking up with something like reflux, or you can't get sleep because of reflux, then one of the things could be the timing of your meals. Reflux, of course, is a whole separate subject.
Yes.
But one of the things to look at is just to make sure you finish eating 3 hours before you go to bed.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we could carry on for hours on this, but I feel like we've already put a lot of information in here. So I think probably it's time to just leave it, because otherwise we're going to bombard people with so much information they'll never sleep again.
Well, I really hope you guys will sleep. On the subject of magnesium, by the way, I do want to just touch on it, because it comes up so much in the group. So in fact, I was on a webinar for all about depression today, and the magnesium came up. And I think a useful form for both sleep and anxiety, and particularly if you're not sleeping because you're anxious, is the glycinate form.
Yeah.
So give that a go. And another thing that people find helpful if they don't want to take magnesium, or they can't take magnesium, or supplements aren't in their budgets or something, is some people find Epsom salt baths helpful.
Yes, and that's a much more accessible way of getting at it, isn't it?
I mean, I don't know. People say, oh, it's absorbed through the skin. I'm never quite sure about that. But it's, and you have to have quite a lot of Epsom salt in your bath. You can't just put a teaspoon in. It's got to be like the Red Sea, the Dead Sea. But give it a go, because it's a relatively inexpensive and safe way of seeing if that would help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, Susannah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Emily. And, if anyone wants to get in touch, please just message me through the hub, and I'd be very happy to go into more depth about this with you, because there's more we can say.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.